Lena's high school loved simple rules, and one of them ruled everything students were not allowed to touch each other. On paper, it sounded tidy. In practice, it meant her younger brother Theo, autistic, gentle, and easily overwhelmed, was cut off from the one intervention that reliably settled his nervous system: deep pressure hugs. At-home pressure across his shoulders and back worked like a switch. Without it, Theo's sensory overload stretched from minutes into hours. Lena tried to adapt to the rule. She practiced breathing exercises with him. She bought a weighted vest and followed every occupational therapy handout she could find. None of it helped the way firm, sustained pressure did. During lunch, Lena would stop by the special education room to check on Theo from the doorway. His aide, Ms. Carver, meant well, but misunderstood autism. When Theo began to rock or flap to self-regulate, she told him to have quiet hands. She turned the lights to full brightness, insisting he needed to see clearly, and raised her voice to be more authoritative. Those choices poured fuel on a fire Lena could see building even from the hall. Lena typed up instructions, short practical sentences about dim lighting, low voice and pressure input during crises, and handed them over. Ms. Carver waved them away, saying she had training. The special education coordinator, Ms. Sharma, echoed the same line: protocols were protocols. Lena's parents were too worn down from years of IEP meetings to hope for quick change. State testing week shattered the routine that kept Theo steady. Halfway through Lena's English exam, a piercing, high-pitched sound rose from down the corridor, a note she knew by heart. It was Theo's panic keening the one that meant he was hurting himself. Lena asked to use the restroom and walked straight to the special education room. Theo was on the tiles, slamming his forehead into the floor. Blood threaded down his face. 2 staff members held his arms while his head stayed free. The other students had been moved out, but a few stared through the window, eyes wide. Ms. Carver stood over him, telling him to stop. Lena knelt beside her brother and said his name low and even. Theo met her eyes for a second there, then gone. She had only moments. Ignoring the rule, she wrapped him in a tight, steady hug, aligning her chest across his upper back and shoulders. She counted her breaths and felt for his applying firm pressure, the way his occupational therapist had shown their family years before. Theo's body softened in stages: jaw, hands, torso. His breathing matched hers. After a few minutes, the keening faded to a small hum, the first 4 notes of the lullaby their mother used to sing. Lena kept holding him because letting go too quickly could restart the spiral. Behind her, Ms. Carver protested about liability policy and consequences. Security and the principal, Mr. Mendez, arrived. Lena heard the principal instruct someone to report the incident for documentation. She kept her arms around Theo until their parents reached the room. Only when Theo's gaze was clear and his breathing steady did Lena loosen her hold. The floor was still smeared with drying red, the room still bright, and the rule still intact. But for those 3 minutes, pressure had won over protocol. 2 evenings after the hallway incident, a knock split the quiet of Lena's kitchen. A woman in a gray blazer introduced herself as Investigator Hollis from Child Protective Services. She set a clipboard on the table and in a clipped voice said the school had reported Lena for non-consensual physical restraint of a vulnerable student. Lena's parents went still. Her father's hands tightened around the chair back. Her mother's mouth opened and shut without sound. Hollis asked whether Lena should have unsupervised access to Theo. Lena unlocked her phone with trembling fingers and cued a video she'd kept for years. In it, Theo, autistic and in full sensory overload, pounded his head against a wall screaming. Lena stepped behind him, applied firm, sustained pressure across shoulders and back, and within seconds, the noise softened to a hum. Lena showed a second video with the same arc panic deep pressure regulation. She laid out paperwork from Theo's occupational therapist diagrams. Signatures letterhead, Each page stated that deep pressure was an appropriate intervention for his sensory processing disorder. Hollis took notes with the flat effect of someone taught not to react. Lena described what she'd found at school staff pinning Theo's arms while his head stayed free to meet the tile. Fluorescent lights blazing, commands to be quiet shouted over the echo of his keening. Hollis underlined something and asked why trained adults had not used a safer hold. Lena said the safest option for Theo wasn't a hold at all. It was pressure input delivered correctly. That night, Lena's phone buzzed again, an email titled "Disciplinary Hearing Notice." The school charged her with leaving a state exam without permission and violating the no-contact policy. The letter mentioned possible suspension and further action. Money was tight. Hiring an attorney felt impossible. Lena told her parents she would prepare herself. She built a dossier: medical journal abstracts on deep pressure and arousal pathways, position statements from autism organizations, old therapy reports recommending pressure input during crises. She organized everything into sections clinical basis, school incidents, proposed accommodations, and logged each meltdown's length at home versus at school. Photos documented bruises on Theo's wrists from improper restraint and the scabbed line along his hairline after the headbanging episode. By the end of the weekend, Lena could flip to any tab in seconds. On a forum thread about special education rights, someone mentioned Aaron Pike, an advocate at a local disability nonprofit. Lena called, summarized the incident, and sent Theo's IEP. Aaron phoned back quickly. There was no sensory plan at all. He called this a foundational failure because the district could not claim it was following a plan that didn't exist. With Aaron's guidance, Lena drafted a formal request for an emergency IEP meeting to add sensory accommodations, cited state rules on parent participation, and sent it by email with read receipts turned on. A few hours later, a read receipt pinged Principal Mendez had opened it. Witnesses surfaced. The mother of a girl who had watched through the classroom window wrote that her daughter was having nightmares about the blood on Theo's face. She offered a statement about how staff actions had traumatized other students. Lena added the letter to her binder and highlighted a line about fear of the room where it happened. For legal strategy, Lena booked a short consultation with Maya Chen, an education attorney. Maya walked her through two paths: a state complaint, which typically triggers an investigation within weeks, or a longer federal complaint, to the Office for Civil Rights. Given Theo's ongoing risk, Maya recommended starting with the state process. Together, they drafted a complaint focused on denial of appropriate education, the district's failure to provide necessary sensory accommodations, the unsafe restraint, and the blanket no-contact policy applied despite documented medical need. Lena mailed it certified, then scanned the receipt into her records. Parallel to the paperwork, Lena and Aaron assembled a pragmatic proposal staff training in de-escalation and sensory support, compression vests and a squeeze device for proprioceptive input, a quiet corner, low lighting, and noise-dampening headphones, a simple picture card system Theo could use to request pressure. The list included estimated costs modest compared with other school expenses and links to training providers. They wanted decision-makers to see not only what had gone wrong, but precisely how to fix it. Hollis scheduled a follow-up interview. Lena kept her log going, noting every trigger, every strategy that worked, and every hour lost to policies that prioritized liability over safety. The stack of evidence grew not to bury anyone, but to make one point impossible to ignore. For Theo, deep pressure wasn't affection, it was medicine. By the time Monday arrived, Lena's binder looked less like a school project and more like a field guide to her brother's nervous system. Tabs labeled policy medical incidents and fixes stuck out like flags. She'd rehearsed answers in the mirror until her voice no longer shook. Still, when the secretary called her name for the disciplinary panel, her palms went damp. Inside, 3 administrators and a counselor formed a neat row. Principal Mendez read the charges, leaving a state exam without permission and engaging in prohibited physical contact. Lena didn't argue the sequence of events. She told them what she heard from the testing room, Theo's high-tearing keening, and what she found in the special ed classroom, 2 staffers pinning his arms while his head met the tile. She explained that deep, steady pressure was the safest intervention for Theo, not a restraint, but a sensory input prescribed by his occupational therapist. The room didn't thaw. The assistant principal asked if Lena understood why rules exist. "To keep students safe," she said. "That's exactly why I acted." The special ed coordinator, Ms. Morrow, wanted to know if Lena would make the same choice again. Lena took a breath and said yes, if faced with her brother cracking his skull on school floors, she would choose safety over policy. The panel sent her to the hallway while they deliberated. 45 minutes later, they called her back with a tight package of consequences: 1 week of in-school suspension, a 10% deduction on the makeup exam, and a reflective essay on the importance of following rules. Lena nodded, not because she agreed, but because arguing wouldn't help Theo today. The next hearing came with more people and colder air, the emergency IEP meeting. Lena sat with her parents along one side of a long table. Across from them were Ms. Morrow, 2 teachers, a school psychologist, and a district representative. Investigator Hollis from CPS sat off to the side, notebook open. Lena didn't lead with outrage. She led with needs. She described Theo's sensory profile light sensitivity, echo triggers, sudden sound spikes, and the interventions that worked. Then she shifted to the harm's restraint marks on his wrists, the scar along his hairline, from headbanging the way bright fluorescence pushed him toward panic. Predictably, the first offers were cosmetic. A behavior chart here, extra prompts there. Lena opened the Fixes tab and slid a 1-page plan across the table, trained staff, to deliver compression input during escalation, a quiet corner with dimmed lighting noise dampening headphones, and a picture card system for Theo to request pressure. The district rep said training might be cost prohibitive. Lena countered with a list of low-cost providers and a schedule that fit within existing professional development days. When the stalemate hardened, Dr. Sierra Ramos, a board-certified behavior analyst, the district consulted, occasionally joined by video. She scanned Lena's plan, and to Lena's surprise, agreed with most of it. Compression, Dr. Ramos said, wasn't cuddling. It was proprioceptive input, known to help some autistic students downshift from overload. After 3 hours, the team reached a cautious compromise. A pilot compression protocol to be implemented by trained staff, limited observation hours, from Dr. Ramos to coach the team, the picture card system, trialed in both the classroom and hall transitions, and a commitment to review data in 6 weeks. No one called it a victory, but it was movement. The meeting notes were printed before anyone stood up, as if fastening the language to the table might keep the plan from slipping away. There was one immediate change Lena hadn't anticipated. Ms. Carver, the aide who'd worked with Theo for months, was reassigned. In her place came Jenna Park, new to the building and to autism supports. Jenna was kind, soft-voiced patient, but transitions rattled Theo. For 3 days, he crawled under his desk during reading block, head down, fingers pressed to his temples. Jenna looked to Lena with wordless questions in the hallway. Lena could only point to the plan. The ban imposed by the disciplinary office still kept Lena out of the special ed wing. Discipline is separate from accommodation, the principal had said, in a tone that turned the distinction into a wall. Training began mid-week. Dr. Ramos modeled how to align the body, where to place hands, how to maintain pressure without immobilizing, how to co-regulate breathing. She emphasized consent signals. Theo's head tilt his micronod, so staff wouldn't mistake panic stillness for acceptance. Jenna practiced until her grip was steady and her count consistent. On the first real test, an unannounced fire drill, the room exploded into sirens before anyone could cue Theo's headphones. He hit himself twice, then reached for Jenna with both hands. She wrapped him, counted to 10, reset to 5, and the momentum reversed. The episode wasn't pretty, but it ended in minutes, not an hour. While school tinkered with technique, CPS tightened process. Lena and her parents attended a case conference downtown in a windowless room with a low ceiling and humming vents. Hollis and 2 colleagues framed their questions in neutral language: supervision, safety plans, future risk. The outcome felt bureaucratic but heavy. Lena could not be alone with Theo on campus. Any contact at school had to be supervised. The investigation would remain open pending data from the IEP pilot. Hollis said it protected everyone. To Lena, it felt like a badge she couldn't take off. Because Lena was barred from the special ed hallway, Jenna began texting brief updates during her prep period. After lunch, Small Wobble used card compression 2x back to math. Trigger locker slam in corridor. Headphones helped. The messages were clinical and short, but they stitched a little thread between siblings when the building tried to cut it. The wider community reacted in ways no policy could easily contain. Rumors bloomed that Lena had tackled a teacher, that security had dragged her off, that she'd harmed her brother. A few classmates avoided her, others watched her with the curiosity people reserve for spectacle. At a PTA meeting, a mother spoke up for Theo, describing how her daughter couldn't sleep after watching blood on the floor through the classroom window. Word of that meeting came back to Lena through a friend, and 2 students mumbled apologies in the lunch line. None of it erased the way some teachers now paused when Lena entered a room measuring risk where there was none. At home, Lena kept building the case. The school said it wanted data. With Aaron Pike, the advocate, and Maya Chen, the attorney, she trimmed jargon and sharpened findings. They made a 1-page snapshot for staff. Theo's green, yellow, red cues, what to do at each tier, the exact phrasing for picture card prompts, a reminder that stimming is regulation, not misbehavior. They also prepared for the next IEP review, rehearsing answers the way one rehearses safety drills, calmly, firmly, with proof. Lena also wrote something different, a 2-minute impact statement, as if spoken by Theo. She didn't pretend to ventriloquize his mind. She described patterns she'd learned across 15 years, how fluorescent light felt like sand in the eyes, how echoed voices stacked like hammers, how pressure turned chaos into something his body could hear. She paired the language until it could stand up in a room where patience is measured by clocks and copies. Midway through all of this, an email thread landed in Lena's father's inbox by accident, copied wrong by a harried secretary. In it, administrators debated their bigger fear liability. A restraint case from years prior still haunted the district. A settlement had drained funds and goodwill. The thread didn't change Theo's needs, but it explained the rigid posture Lena kept meeting. She printed the emails and slid them into a tab called Context, not to weaponize them, but to remind herself which battle she was actually fighting. By the end of the week, the building looked exactly the same. The same buzzing lights, the same laminate bulletin boards. And yet, inside the sameness, small hinges had been oiled. Jenna's hands no longer hesitated. Theo's picture card taps were more precise. Staff who'd once said protocol with a period now said protocol with a comma, followed by questions about earplugs, lamp filters, softer spaces. The pilot was only a promise on paper, but for the first time it felt like paper that could carry weight. Lena still walked hallways where some eyes narrowed. She still carried a suspension on her record and a percentage missing from a test score that didn't measure anything that mattered that day. But when she lay awake at night, she could point to 3 things the week had made real: a formal plan that named compression as a support, an aide who knew how to use it, and a system imperfect, partial supervised, where Theo's needs were not an afterthought. The fight wasn't over. It was simply organized. The weeks afterward did not march. They blurred. Progress came in threads so fine that Lena had to hold them up to the light to see them. A shorter note in Jenna's daily text, a calmer walk between classes, a worksheet finished without the pencil snapping in Theo's fist. Every evening, Lena filed those details into the binder that had taken over the dining table. It looked like a second paper version of their lives' dates, triggers, responses, outcomes. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived from the state education department. The letter confirmed receipt of the complaint and laid out a timetable that stretched past the horizon. Investigation steps, document requests, interviews, up to 6 months before findings. Lena's stomach sank. When she called Aaron Pike the advocate, he said gently that 6 months was actually fast. It didn't feel fast in a house measured by meltdowns and lulls. Money sat in every conversation like another chair at the table. Lena's parents opened real estate listings for the good district across town, then closed them again when their eyes reached the rent. They joked once about selling the car for a down payment and laughed in the dry way that means don't say that again. Private programs were worse tuition numbers that belonged to another planet. And then there was the house itself, visual schedules at every level, a spare room converted into a sensory space lamps with soft shades instead of overhead glare. Home was not just cheap, it was fitted. School didn't stand still either. Mr. Reyes, Lena's English teacher, quietly granted extensions and told her to bring essays when she could. "We measure what matters," he said, and meant it. The math department took another view. A missed test was a missed test. Even with a makeup, Lena's score carried a mandatory deduction. Her GPA slid from the neat slope she had built since freshman year. On paper, it was a small drop. In her head, it rearranged the map of possible colleges and scholarships. It's strange, she thought, how a moment of safety could echo through a transcript more loudly than the reasons for it. At the next school board meeting, Lena used her allotted 2 minutes. She stuck to facts. She described what she had seen her brother's forehead striking tile, the way blood is too bright on a white floor, the sound a skull makes when it becomes a metronome. One board member watched the clock, another shuffled papers, one couldn't quite meet her eyes. It wasn't catharsis, but it was the first time the story entered the official record without a euphemism. The district's behavior analyst, Dr. Sierra Ramos, returned to campus for a deeper look. With a small decibel meter and a notebook, she walked Theo's classroom and the corridor beyond it. She pointed out the electrical hum. The rest of the room had learned to ignore the sharp lemon chemical smell baked into the mop closet, the way hard surfaces turned voices into ricochets. Her report recommended acoustic panels, a couple of floor lamps, with warm bulbs, a quiet corner outfitted with noise-reducing headphones, and a short staff training on sensory support. The price tag wasn't extravagant. Still, the special education coordinator cited the budget and called the suggestions aspirational. Lena wrote aspirational on a sticky note and pressed it under the binder tab that read fixes. 8 weeks to the day after the first CPS visit, a final letter arrived. Unsubstantiated. The word should have felt like a door opening. It didn't. A paragraph below explained that services offered would be noted in the file. The existence of the investigation might surface in future background checks for roles involving children or vulnerable populations. Lena reread that line 3 times, then put the letter in a plastic sleeve like it was something fragile. She had always wanted to teach, especially students like Theo, the ones who spoke in gestures before words. Now the path toward that classroom looked kinked, and still there were days of relief that made everyone take a longer breath. Jenna texted a photo of Theo leaning over his math worksheet, shoulders dropped, pencil steady. Small after-lunch wobble, used pressure card, compression X1. Back on task, their mother cried in the way people cry when the body catches up to good news. Later that evening, they ate pizza, and no one said the magic words. Maybe it's turning because hope likes quiet. At home, Lena watched the way anxiety left fingerprints on Theo's habits. He flinched when the front door opened too suddenly. He touched the thin ridge at his hairline the way one checks a pocket. Sunday evenings were the hardest. He would pace a slow oval around his room and hum a fragment of their mother's lullaby, not the tune so much as the rhythm of being held. When he slept, he sometimes woke with his hands pressed against his temples as if keeping noise out of his head. During her in-school suspension, Lena had been told to write an essay about the value of following rules. She wrote about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, instead about meaningful access, about supports that are effective, rather than simply available, about the difference between managing behavior and addressing need. The administrator who reviewed it said it wasn't what had been assigned. Lena said it was the only assignment that made sense. The next morning, Lena saw Jenna and Theo crossing the courtyard. When a cluster of students burst into laughter near the door, Theo startled, then reached into his pocket and tapped the small picture card that showed two hands pressing down. Jenna matched his pace, placed her arms across his shoulders the way Dr. Ramos had taught, and counted in a low voice, not 1, 2, 3, but breath lengths in holdout. Theo's shoulders softened. He didn't stop humming, not yet, but the hum shifted from siren to thread. On the legal front, Maya Chen filed a second complaint with the Office for Civil Rights, carefully mirroring the state-filed allegations while emphasizing the no-contact rule applied despite medical documentation. The forms arrived as a stack so thick that Lena printed them double-sided and still used most of a pack of paper. 2 avenues increases the chance of an enforceable fix, Maya said. It was not a promise, but it was a path. Weeks slipped by measured in small data points. Theo used his card 5 times in one day. Another day, a lunchroom fire alarm test scheduled, but not communicated to the special ed room, sent him to the edge of headbanging before Jenna intercepted with pressure and headphones. Lena's mother began carrying a binder of her own, a chronological ledger of incidents and improvements. Their father stayed up late reading policy manuals and browsing rentals in neighborhoods where the schools had better reputations and shorter waiting lists for evaluations. Both parents moved like people carrying invisible weight. By December, Lena's transcripts had thickened with letters she didn't like. The guidance counselor offered to help draft an addendum for college applications, a short narrative to explain the dip. "Tell them who you are under pressure," she said, and half smiled at her accidental pun. Lena opened a blank document and tried to compress a year into 650 words, the day she broke a rule, the minutes it took for her brother's nervous system to return to itself, the administrative language that followed the bargains they kept striking with a system that preferred documents to adjustments. She deleted more sentences than she saved. January brought the state investigator, a woman with quick eyes and a legal pad. She toured the special ed wing, touched the flickering light cover, ran a finger along the ridged plastic of the headphones locked in a cabinet. In interviews, she circled back, asking about staff training records, about supervision ratios during drills, about who decided when to restrain and how. Lena's mother cried quietly while describing the bruises she'd photographed in the fall. The investigator didn't promise anything. She wrote and wrote and wrote. February unexpectedly gave them a gift: 7 straight days without self-injury. Theo made it through a field trip to the Science Museum by staying near the quiet exhibit and swapping headphones every hour to keep the cushion fresh. When he returned, Jenna texted a single line: "Best day yet." At home, they celebrated with his favorite movie and pizza cut into small squares. No one pretended the past was erased. A good week is a good week, Lena thought. It doesn't owe you anything more. Even with the pilot protocol in place, the building itself continued to work against him. On certain afternoons, the fluorescent buzz rose like a swarm. Cleaning chemicals lingered longer than they should have. A locker slammed too close and sent Theo's hands to his temples. The team gathered data, adjusted, and discovered the speed limit for change. People shift faster than ceilings, and budgets move slower than both. By spring, the principal called Lena into his office. He said in a careful voice that the district was reviewing the no-contact policy for family caregivers in documented medical situations. He spoke about insurance and liability and precedent. Lena nodded. Gratitude wasn't what she felt. The policy should have bent before blood hit a floor. By then, Lena had become fluent in 2 languages, the one about compliance and the one about care. She could recite excerpts from policy manuals and in the next breath describe how Theo's breathing changed when pressure was right. She could translate stimming into regulation for a room that still wanted to call it misbehavior. She could name victories without pretending they were enough. A trained aide, a laminated card, a protocol with checkboxes that captured only a corner of a person. On a gray Friday, after a long week of not quite enough sleep, Lena passed the special ed wing and peeked through the small rectangular window in the door. Jenna and Theo sat at a side table. He pointed to his card and she nodded, hands moving into the practiced shape. Lena couldn't hear them, but she recognized the rhythm, steady press-matched breathing release. On the wall above them, a laminated poster said "Respect the rules" in block letters. Below it on the table, a boy and the person assigned to help him were enacting a quieter sentence. Respond to the person in front of you. That was how the year ended up feeling less like closure and more like an ongoing grammar lesson. The system had not magically become kind or quick. It had learned a few new words and on good days used them in a sentence. The rest would take time: budget cycles, policy rewrites, parents who kept receipts, staff who practiced until muscle memory replaced fear. For now, paperwork held the door open just wide enough for Theo to pass through without bruising his forehead on the frame. That sliver of space wasn't everything, but it was something, and something is what you hold on to when you need the next step to exist. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.